There is a quiet kind of woman in this world, one who walks alone, not because she cannot belong, but because she refuses to betray herself to do so. Her silence is often mistaken for sadness, her solitude mistaken for weakness, and her absence in circles misread as social failure. But beneath that still surface lies a deep reservoir of power, an inner world so vast few dare to enter. She is the woman with no friends, not by accident, but by design. This speech is for her, and for those who are walking the same path, questioning if they are broken, unworthy, or forgotten. You are not. In fact, your story may be more important now than ever before. In every human soul there lies a need to belong, a deep, ancient yearning to be part of a tribe, to be seen, heard, and embraced by others. This desire is not weakness. It is rooted in survival. But there comes a moment in some women's lives when they are asked to choose between their authenticity and their acceptance. That moment, though silent to the outside world, is seismic within. And when a woman chooses herself over fitting in, she does so not without grief, but with unshakable clarity. She does not turn her back on friendship because she is incapable of it, but because she has seen what it costs to be loved conditionally. She has tasted the bitterness of approval purchased by silence, and she has watched her soul shrink in rooms where her truth was too loud for the comfort of others. It is not that she did not want connection. It is that she refused to pay for it with pieces of herself. In many social groups, especially among women, friendship is often woven together by shared wounds, mutual complaints, or synchronized stagnation. There are invisible contracts, often deeply entrenched, that say, do not outgrow us, do not speak too boldly, do not dream too freely. She who dares to evolve becomes a mirror that reflects the inertia of the group. And that reflection, though unspoken, is deeply threatening. Sarah, a corporate employee in her late 30s, discovered this truth in the most subtle and painful of ways. She began to change, not dramatically, but intentionally. She started reading more, setting boundaries, and talking less about people and more about ideas. Her glow didn't come from cosmetics, but from confidence. She stopped nodding when she disagreed. She stopped showing up when her soul was tired, and without warning the air shifted. The group she once called her circle began to respond not with curiosity, but with discomfort. Her laughter became too loud, her insight too deep, her distance offensive. The day Sarah decided not to apologize for who she was becoming was the day her phone stopped ringing. Invitations grew sparse. Conversations turned curt. It hurt, but not enough to return to the version of herself that once felt safe in their eyes. She realized she had been trading her truth for inclusion, her voice for peace, her soul for social comfort. And in reclaiming herself, she accepted the solitude that followed, not as exile, but as emancipation. The woman with no friends is often misread. They say she is cold, arrogant, or difficult, but what they miss is the quiet strength it takes to walk alone when the alternative is betrayal of self. They do not see the late nights of self-doubt, the aching nostalgia for community, the longing glances at old photos, but she knows what she gained. She walks differently now. She listens to her own voice louder than the noise around her. She trusts the silence even when it echoes. What many call loneliness, she has learned to call liberation, because belonging should never cost integrity, and friendships that require you to dim your light to be accepted are not friendships at all. They are prisons with velvet walls. To choose oneself in a world that rewards conformity is not rebellion. It is remembrance, a remembering of who she was before the world told her who to be. And though she walks with fewer hands in hers, she walks with her head high, her voice intact, and her spirit free. There is a hidden cost to connection that most never pause long enough to count. In a world overflowing with noise, where likes have replaced listening and presence is often performed rather than felt, Many find themselves in the company of others, yet feel profoundly alone. For the woman with no friends, this paradox is not unfamiliar. She has stood in crowded rooms and felt her spirit ache with a sense of absence, not of bodies, but of meaning. Not all connection is nourishment. In fact, much of what passes for companionship in modern life is more akin to emotional fast food, easily available, momentarily satisfying, but ultimately empty. She has lived this truth again and again. Smiles that don't quite reach the eyes, conversations that skate the surface and never dare to dive, interactions in which she feels seen but not truly known. There's a deep exhaustion that comes from shallow waters. You can tread there for a while, but nothing grows and nothing heals. This woman, who now walks alone, did not make that choice from arrogance or bitterness. She arrived at solitude after being starved in spaces where depth was forbidden and masks were mandatory. Her silence, then, is not a void. It is a declaration. It is her soul's refusal to settle for the crumbs of connection when it was built for the banquet of truth. There is a kind of pain that arises when your need for intimacy is answered with performance, when your openness is met with judgment or indifference. Over time, these encounters create a subtle erosion. You begin to question your worth, your sensitivity, your longing. But this woman, instead of growing numb to protect herself, made a different choice. She stepped away, not to escape the world, but to preserve her soul. Research supports what her intuition already knew. A 2023 study by the American Psychological Association confirmed that those with fewer but deeper emotional connections reported higher levels of psychological well-being than those with many casual or superficial ones. The study didn't just measure quantity, it measured the felt sense of being understood, supported, and emotionally safe. This woman may not have a long contact list, but she possesses something far rarer, inner alignment. She refuses to be touched without being felt, heard without being understood, or seen without being valued. It's not that she dislikes people. On the contrary, she feels deeply, sometimes painfully so. But she has learned that the ability to feel is sacred, and sacred things must not be squandered. She would rather spend a night in the company of her own thoughts, wandering through the forests of her mind, than in a room where conversation is cheap and connection is transactional. In solitude, she has found clarity. She has made peace with the pauses. She no longer fears the absence of others, because she is no longer absent from herself. And so, while the world may wonder why she walks alone, she knows the answer lies in what she carries within. Her standards are not too high, they are finally just high enough. She does not shrink herself to fit into places she has outgrown. She does not laugh to belong or nod to be liked. She listens to her own silence now, and in that silence she has found a voice that no crowd could ever give her. And so she waits, not for popularity, not for validation, but for resonance. Because when you've known the weight of the superficial, you will only make room for the real. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of pain. It is not loud, but it is deafening. It wraps itself around the heart like a thin sheet of ice, fragile, cold, and yet necessary. For the woman with no friends, this silence is not a sign of pride or defiance or superiority. It is the soft, invisible aftermath of a storm no one saw, a storm called betrayal. She did not begin her life this way. No woman is born guarded. We come into the world open, curious, trusting, ready to give, to love, to share. And she was no different. There was a time when she believed that friendship was sacred, that secrets were safe, and that loyalty was mutual. She gave generously, her time, her empathy, her dreams, her flaws. She let others see her, not the polished mask, but the raw truth beneath, and in doing so she believed she was building something unshakable. but sometimes the people we trust the most become the architects of our deepest wounds. They do not always wound us with knives. Sometimes it is done with words, carelessly spoken, or worse, intentionally shared. And the deepest betrayal often comes not from enemies, but from those we once called home. Maria, a nurse in her 40s, tells her story with a quiet voice. It shakes, but it does not break. After giving birth, she fell into a darkness she could not explain, a fog of postpartum depression that clouded even the simplest of tasks. She turned to the one person she believed would understand, her closest friend. She spoke of her pain in whispers, confessed her fears, her moments of guilt, her sense of unraveling. It was not easy to say, but she said it. She handed her truth to another, hoping it would be held gently. But days later, fragments of her story began to echo back to her, distorted, exaggerated, laughed about behind closed doors. What had been spoken in sacred trust became a tale passed around like gossip. Her vulnerability, instead of being honored, was weaponized, and something inside her shut down. Not because she hated the world, but because the one place she thought was safe had proven otherwise. Since that moment, Maria's world has grown smaller. She no longer seeks large groups or open-hearted circles. Her most faithful companion is a journal, a silent witness, one that listens without judgment, one that holds her pain without ever turning it into entertainment. In that quiet space she writes, she remembers, she heals, and she does so not quickly but honestly, because trust is not a faucet. It cannot simply be turned on again when enough time has passed. Trust is a living thing. It grows slowly, and when it is broken, it must be replanted, watered, tended to with patience. The woman who walks alone is not always avoiding connection. She is protecting the parts of her that once bled freely. She has learned to be cautious with her soul. And in a world where secrets are currency and intimacy is often exploited, that caution is not weakness. It is wisdom. Her silence is not a punishment to others. It is a promise to herself. A boundary forged not from bitterness, but from hard-earned self-respect. So when she doesn't speak much, when she doesn't attend the gatherings, when she keeps her eyes lowered and her responses measured, do not mistake her quiet for emptiness. Behind it lies a history, a lesson, a scar, and beyond the scar, a woman slowly coming back to herself, not in the company of many, but in the sacred company of her own truth. There is a woman who moves through life at a quieter rhythm than the world around her. Where others are caught in a frantic race for attention, she steps back. Where the crowd gathers, she slips away. Not because she despises company, but because she has discovered something far more precious than applause. She has found meaning in silence. While the world shouts its opinions, advertises its pain, and displays its joy like storefront mannequins, she turns inward. Her life is not lived on the surface, it is cultivated in the deep. She has come to understand something that cannot be taught in classrooms or extracted from social experience. Something only the soul can reveal when the noise finally fades. That truth is this: real transformation does not happen in the presence of others, but in solitude. She has stood at the center of gatherings where laughter echoed and voices filled the room, and still felt the vastness of a void no one else seemed to sense. It was in those moments she realized that connection, when built on surface pleasantries and performative intimacy, could never quench her thirst for depth, so she stopped chasing what looked like belonging. She stopped measuring her worth by how many people invited her, texted her, or remembered her birthday. Instead, she began walking inward toward herself, each step a confrontation with her own wounds. Each moment of silence, a mirror held up to her own desires, fears, longings. It was uncomfortable at first. Solitude, for those unaccustomed to it, can feel like exile, but with time it became sanctuary. She began to understand her own emotional tides. She could feel when a mood was hers and when it had been absorbed from others. She noticed how some conversations made her heart race with anxiety, while others left her feeling deeply nourished. She tuned herself like an instrument, not to the noise of the world, but to the subtle vibrations of her soul, and in doing so, she awakened a sensitivity that is rare in our age, the ability to listen, truly listen, to what is not being said. Such sensitivity cannot thrive in chaos. It requires stillness. It requires space. So she made space. She stopped over-explaining. She stopped defending her need to be alone. She stopped feeling guilty for choosing herself. And in that choice she bloomed, not with the noisy colors of validation, but with the soft glow of self-awareness. Some might call her distant, others strange. They do not understand how a woman can choose silence over celebration, books over brunches, long walks over loud conversations. But they have never tasted the sweetness of coming home to oneself. They have never wept without needing an audience. They have never created in the sacred hours before dawn, when the world is still and the veil between the visible and invisible is thinnest. In her solitude she has visions. Ideas rise to the surface like long, forgotten songs. Traumas, once buried beneath obligations and distractions, emerge not to torment, but to be witnessed, honored, and released. And in those quiet, sacred moments, she is not just alone. She is being reborn. She is not lost. She is not broken. She is not in need of fixing or rescuing. She is focused on her inner world because that is where the real work of becoming takes place. And as she nurtures the unseen, she grows a strength the world cannot measure. It does not post selfies. It does not demand likes, but it is unshakable, it is truth, and it is hers. There is a rhythm to life that does not move according to clocks or calendars. It pulses beneath the surface of things, waiting for those who are patient enough to listen. For the woman who walks alone, who sits with her solitude not as punishment but as passage, this rhythm becomes familiar. She begins to sense that what others call delay is often a kind of divine timing. In a world that moves at the speed of urgency, she is learning to move at the speed of depth. Her lack of friendships today is not evidence of her unworthiness, but of her alignment. She is no longer available for relationships that require her to dilute her truth, shrink her voice, or trade parts of her soul for the illusion of belonging. And though she may hunger for connection, she has made a sacred vow to never again settle for the counterfeit version of it. She does not fill the silence with noise. She does not numb the ache with distraction. She waits, not passively, but purposefully. In this waiting, something remarkable begins to unfold. As she stands firmly in who she is, unapologetic, unmasked, unshaken, she becomes a kind of magnet. Not the kind that pulls in everyone, but the kind that calls forth the few who are meant for her. These are not friendships born out of convenience or shared wounds. They are not forged in the fires of gossip or bound by mutual insecurity. They are not relationships that beg to be constantly reassured or clung to in fear. These are connections made of something quieter, stronger, deeper alignment. True friendship, the kind that nourishes rather than drains, is rare because it does not emerge from need but from choice. Two people who have done their own inner work, who have faced their own shadows, who do not require the other to complete them but to complement them, this is the foundation of real companionship. There is no performance, no manipulation, no bargaining. There is only presence, and yet this kind of connection often does not arrive in youth, when we are still learning who we are through the mirrors of others. It comes later, when the mask has cracked, when the soul has tired of pretending, when loneliness has taught us the value of our own company. According to Harvard's 85-year longitudinal study of adult development, the most meaningful relationships are often formed later in life, not because people become more likable, but because they become more authentic. When the games are over, when the roles have been shed, when the performance ends, what remains is something raw, something real. This is the gift of the woman who waits. Her solitude is not a punishment, but a preparation. She is not isolated, she is being refined, and in that refining she becomes a beacon. Those who are aligned with her frequency will find her, not through chance, but through resonance. They will recognize the strength in her stillness, the clarity in her presence, and the peace in her eyes. There will be no need for explanations, no need for masks, no fear of being too much or too little. They will meet, not to fix each other, but to witness each other. Until that moment arrives, she holds the space. She tends the garden of her soul. She walks the path not with bitterness, but with quiet faith that what is meant for her will never require her to betray herself to have it. She does not chase, she does not cling. She simply becomes, and in becoming, she calls forth the kind of friendships that do not wither in time, but grow stronger with it. That is the power of waiting. That is the wisdom of timing. That is the promise of alignment. So, if you are the woman with no friends, know this: you are not broken, you are becoming. Your solitude is not a punishment, it is a passage, a sacred one. Walk it with pride. And when you look up one day and find another walking beside you, not to complete you, but to complement you, you will know the wait was worth it, because you did not shrink to belong. You rose alone, and that is the beginning of true connection.